In 1881, Charles Darwin published the last book of his life. Not about evolution, not about natural selection, about worms. He spent 40 years studying them, buried stones in his garden at Down House, and watched them sink, measured soil turnover, calculated output, and at the end of 4 decades, he wrote something the fertilizer industry has spent the last century hoping you would forget. It may be doubted whether there are many other animals which have played so important a part in the history of the world as have these lowly, organized creatures. He was talking about earthworms, and he was right in a way that goes far beyond anything he could measure with Victorian-era tools. Because Darwin understood something no agrochemical company wants you to internalize. The most powerful fertilizer system ever discovered is already living underneath your feet. It costs nothing to activate. It runs on kitchen scraps. And once you understand how it works, you will never look at a $40 bag of fertilizer the same way again. A device so simple it costs $2 to make. A buried pipe. That's it. But the biology it activates is so sophisticated, so self-regulating, so ancient that it makes a $300 bag of organic fertilizer look primitive by comparison. By the time you finish this video, you'll have everything you need to install one this weekend. And in 2 growing seasons, your garden soil will be so alive, so biologically rich, that your neighbors will ask what you're doing differently. But first, you need to understand what was almost lost. Long before Darwin, long before synthetic fertilizer, long before the USDA or NPK ratios or the Green Revolution, farmers in Mesopotamia, in India, in China, in pre-Columbian Mesoamerica all independently arrived at the same observation. Soil near decomposing matter grew better crops. Not somewhat better, dramatically better, visibly better, consistently better. And the reason, though they couldn't name it in microbial terms, was always the same. Where there is decomposition, there are worms. Where there are worms, there is fertility. Ancient Roman agricultural texts by Columella, written around 60 AD, described the movement of earthworms through garden plots as a sign of good land. Not a coincidence. Not decoration. A signal that the soil was alive and capable. Roman estate managers would deliberately inoculate new plots with soil from productive areas. They didn't understand they were transferring worm populations and microbial communities. They just knew it worked. In medieval Europe, peasant gardeners maintained what they called dung heaps directly adjacent to their kitchen gardens. Not for aesthetics, because they observed that plants near the rot were always more vigorous. The folk knowledge was there. The observation was accurate. But without a framework for understanding what was actually happening underground, the practice remained intuitive, imprecise, dependent on proximity rather than design. In the 1970s, something changed. A researcher named Mary Appelhoff, working from her home in Michigan, began conducting systematic experiments in vermiculture, the science of using worms to process organic material. She published her findings in a book called Worms Eat My Garbage in 1982, which became one of the most widely read homesteading texts of the 20th century. Appelhoff documented that red wigglers, the composting worm, could process organic waste into a material with nutrient concentrations many times higher than conventional compost. The castings, the worm's excrement, contained 5 times more nitrogen than ordinary topsoil, 7 times more phosphorus, 11 times more potassium, not in synthetic, salt-heavy form that burns roots. In slow-release, plant bioavailable form that feeds the soil food web over weeks and months. The research was published. It was cited. A small community of gardeners and homesteaders built on it. And then, as always happens with knowledge that threatens a $50 billion annual fertilizer industry, the momentum stalled. Because the moment gardeners understand that worms can deliver fertilizer directly to plant roots at no cost, the entire market logic of the synthetic fertilizer industry begins to collapse. But the biology didn't disappear. The worms didn't disappear. The knowledge survived the same way useful knowledge always survives, in the hands of people who paid attention. And now we're going to build it. Here's what's actually happening when the system runs. Because if you understand the biology, you will never neglect the system. And you will never need to. Your garden soil, even depleted, tired, compacted garden soil, contains earthworm populations. They're there, dormant or sparse or driven deep, but present. Earthworms are chemotactic, meaning they navigate toward chemical signals in the soil. When organic material begins to decompose, it releases a specific cocktail of volatile compounds: carbon dioxide, fermentation byproducts, ammonia from protein breakdown, microbial metabolites. To an earthworm, these signals are the equivalent of a dinner bell. They will travel through soil to reach them. This is the mechanism the system exploits. You place a perforated pipe in the center of your garden bed. You fill it with kitchen scraps. Microbes begin breaking down that material within 24 to 48 hours. As decomposition accelerates, chemical signals radiate outward through the soil in every direction. Worms detect those signals and begin moving toward the source. They enter the pipe through the holes you drilled. They consume the partially decomposed material, and then they exit back into the surrounding bed. But here's the part most people miss. The worm doesn't stay in the pipe. The pipe is a feeding station. The worm is the delivery vehicle. As each worm exits through the holes and moves through your garden bed, it's doing three things simultaneously. 1. It's depositing castings, the richest plant-available fertilizer on Earth, directly at the root zone of your plants. 2. It's creating channels and tunnels that allow water to penetrate more deeply and roots to extend more freely. 3. It's inoculating the surrounding soil with beneficial microbes that hitchhike through its digestive system. Over time, a single worm tower in the center of a 4 by 8 foot bed will create a fertility gradient that radiates outward to every corner. The soil nearest the pipe becomes the richest first. But within one full growing season, the biology spreads. The worm population multiplies. The channels multiply. The microbial diversity multiplies. And the plant growth that results is not the temporary forced growth you get from synthetic fertilizer. It's deep, structural, biological growth. The kind that makes plants disease-resistant and drought-tolerant and genuinely productive. This is not chemistry. It's ecology. And ecology, once established, runs itself. Now let's talk about what this system costs. Because this is where the entire premise of the fertilizer industry falls apart. A 4-inch diameter PVC pipe, 24 inches long. At most hardware stores, you can find offcuts or short sections for $1 to $3. That's the core of the system. You'll also need a drill with a 1/2-inch bit, which you probably already own, a cap or lid for the top, a frisbee, a plastic container lid, or a piece of wood, kitchen scraps, which you were going to throw away anyway. Total cost, $2 if you buy nothing else and use what you have. Compare that to a 40-pound bag of slow-release organic fertilizer, which runs between $35 and $60 at any garden center. A bag that you use up in one season, that you have to drive to buy, carry home, apply on schedule, and reorder next spring. A bag manufactured in a facility, transported by truck, packaged in plastic, and sold to you on the premise that your soil cannot feed itself. Your soil can feed itself. It has been doing so for 450 million years, since the first land plants appeared and the first soil organisms evolved alongside them. The industrial fertilizer system is not an improvement on that biology. It's a bypass of it. And bypasses, when you use them long enough, cause the original system to atrophy. The worm tower does the opposite. It rehabilitates the original system. It invites the biology back. And once that biology is thriving, your soil becomes more productive every year, not less. This is what compounding looks like in a garden. Not inputs. Output. Let's build it. No equipment you don't already have. No expertise required. Step 1. Choose your pipe. You want a 4 to 6 inch diameter pipe or cylinder. PVC is most common and cheapest. A food-grade plastic bucket with the bottom cut off also works. So does a section of corrugated drainage pipe. The material matters less than the dimensions. You want something roughly 18 to 24 inches long. This gives you enough depth to stay below the soil's temperature fluctuation zone, where conditions remain stable and worm activity is consistent year-round. Step 2. Drill the holes. Using a 1/2-inch drill bit, make holes across the entire buried section of the pipe. Space them roughly 2 inches apart in a grid pattern. Do not drill holes in the top 4 to 6 inches of the pipe, the section that will remain above ground. You want all the activity happening underground, where worms already live. More holes mean more surface area for worm access and more contact between the decomposing material and the surrounding soil biology. Don't be conservative here. Drill liberally. Step 3. Choose your location. The pipe goes in the center of your bed. Not the edge, the center. Because the fertility gradient radiates outward equally in all directions, and you want the entire bed to benefit. If you have a long bed, say 4 by 12 feet, install 2 pipes, one at each third of the bed. The pipe should be no more than 18 inches from any plant you want to feed. Though over time, the worm population will colonize the entire bed regardless. Step 4. Bury the pipe. Dig a hole and set the pipe so that 2/3 of it is underground. For a 24-inch pipe, roughly 16 inches goes below soil level and 6 to 8 inches remain above. Pack the soil firmly around the pipe so it doesn't shift. This above-ground section is your feed chute. It's where you load scraps. It keeps rain out when covered and keeps pests from accessing the contents. Step 5. The lid. This is important. You need something to cover the top of the pipe between feedings. Not because worms need darkness, they don't interact with the top section, but because the lid prevents flies from laying eggs in the scraps, keeps excess rainwater from flooding the system, maintains the temperature differential that makes the pipe a more attractive destination than ambient soil. A plastic container lid, a piece of slate, a terracotta saucer, a fitted cap from the hardware store. Anything that covers the opening works. Step 6. Activate the system. For the first feeding, add a small handful of existing garden soil or finished compost into the bottom of the pipe before you bury it. This inoculates the system with microbial life and gives decomposition a head start. Then, once buried, your first scraps go in. Now let's talk about what to feed it. Because what you put in determines how fast the biology activates and how quickly worm populations begin responding. The best inputs: fruit and vegetable scraps. Banana peels decompose quickly, attract worms rapidly. Coffee grounds, slightly acidic, high in nitrogen, microbially active. Vegetable trimmings, carrot tops, celery ends, pepper seeds, onion skins. Crushed eggshells decompose slowly but add calcium and moderate pH. Shredded cardboard and paper provide carbon to balance nitrogen-heavy food scraps. What you do not put in: no meat, no dairy, no oily or heavily seasoned food. Decompose into compounds toxic to soil biology, attract rats and flies. Create anaerobic zones that kill worm activity. No large quantities of citrus. Concentrated citrus is acidic enough to deter worms entirely. Small amounts are fine. Nothing treated with herbicides or pesticides. Chemical residues persist through decomposition and damage the worm population. The rhythm of feeding is flexible. Once or twice a week is ideal. A full pipe is not the goal. A consistently replenished pipe is. You're not trying to overwhelm the system with material. You're trying to maintain a steady, attractive signal that keeps worm traffic moving in and out. Think of it less like filling a composter and more like maintaining a slow drip. Consistent, moderate, ongoing. A $2 pipe, a lid, kitchen scraps you were already throwing away. That's the entry point. But what you're actually building is something far larger. You're opting out of the assumption that your land is inert and must be fed from outside. You're choosing instead to see your soil as what it actually is. A living system with its own intelligence, its own logic, its own productivity, waiting to be invited back into partnership. 5 years from now, you'll reach into that garden bed and pull out a carrot or a tomato or a handful of green beans. And you'll feel something that's hard to describe to people who haven't experienced it. A kind of quiet sufficiency. An understanding that the ground beneath you is genuinely alive and genuinely on your side. Your neighbors will buy bags of fertilizer every spring. They'll talk about their plants struggling. They'll wonder why their soil never seems to improve. And you'll smile. Because you buried a $2 pipe in your garden bed and let the worms do what they've always done. And your soil gets richer every single year. This is what Darwin spent 40 years trying to tell us. The pipe is waiting. The worms are already there. If this opens something for you, subscribe so you don't miss the next system. And share this with someone who's still paying for something the ground would give them for free.